So talking about DNA circles tonight, we'll talk about how you get DNA circles. We'll talk about how you can use DNA circles. Can you use them for confirmation, for proof, for brick wall research? Just what are DNA circles useful for? We'll talk about the flaws and limitations of DNA circles so that we're sure to use them appropriately, and we're on the lookout for any problems that might arise. And as the title of this presentation suggests, I will be talking about a success story. This is a brick wall success story that I'm really proud of. So we'll be talking about the full spectrum of experiences with DNA circles, including flaws and successes. So just an introduction for people who may not be as familiar with the DNA circles. Maybe you're new, maybe you're not new, but you've not been able to get any DNA circles for yourself. I'll give you a little background on how we ended up with DNA circles at AncestryDNA. DNA circles are unique to AncestryDNA. They were created in lieu of chromosome browser tools. There was a lot of demand for a chromosome browser, and there continues to be a lot of demand for a chromosome browser at AncestryDNA, but AncestryDNA has refused to provide that. However, in August of 2013, there were some rumors swirling about a tool that could be even better than a chromosome browser, and eventually in 2014, in the wake of these rumors, the DNA circles were rolled out. So DNA circles were described as matches centered around a common ancestor. That's a good description. That's probably the most useful feature of the DNA circles. They do organize your matches around a common ancestor. DNA circles were also described as a vehicle for facilitating exchange and collaboration, making this easier. I think that the DNA circles have fallen short in that respect. One of the initial descriptions of the DNA circles from AncestryDNA was that DNA circles were designed to do the, quote, hard stuff like DNA matching, tree comparisons, and triangulation. Unfortunately, I think the DNA circles have fallen far short in this category. We still have to do hard work, not only with our paper trail research, but also with our genetic genealogy. We have to look very closely at our DNA matches. We can't simply rely upon glossy features like DNA circles to do the hard work. It's really up to us to continue to do hard work in genealogy. So let's not lose sight of that. DNA circles were certainly designed to be very easy. In fact, there's really not much you can do to make your DNA circles appear or to improve the DNA circles directly. So DNA circles are extremely easy, but that I think is their strength and their weakness. No DNA knowledge is required in order to get your DNA circles. You don't have to know about chromosomes. You don't have to know about centimorgans. You don't have to have specialized knowledge. You don't have to study up. You really don't even have to exert much effort except to test your DNA and link your DNA test results to at least some kind of minimal family tree. So there's no special effort required. You just sit and wait for your DNA circles to appear after testing your DNA and linking the DNA test results to the family tree. 4 years later, 4.5 years later, the DNA circles are still in beta, which apparently means that we should temper our expectations. It's interesting that they've been in beta for so long. My strong advice when looking at any kind of DNA match information or DNA circle or shared ancestor hint, be prepared to confirm the DNA connections. I think we all know and understand, or the vast majority of us know and understand, that we need to confirm the paper trail connections, and we often hear people remind us to confirm the paper trail connections for ourselves when we see a discrepancy with our family trees or our DNA test results, but we don't as often hear people telling us that we need to confirm the DNA connections, and I really believe that we need to pay as much attention to the DNA evidence. It deserves just as much scrutiny and attention as the paper trail. So to summarize, I think that if DNA has any value in legitimate family history research, and I think it does, we need to be prepared to examine the DNA evidence very closely, and that includes DNA circles, which were designed to be ridiculously easy and not require scrutiny, but I think scrutiny really is still required. When I was thinking about doing this presentation, I put up a survey to ask people what they think about DNA circles. It was kind of a fill-in-the-blank survey. The most popular response was a DNA circle is a hint. A smaller but significant number consider DNA circles to be strong evidence. Another answer that was fairly popular, a DNA circle is ancestry sorting your DNA matches for you. I think that was a very good answer. There were a number of other answers as well. One response was to remind us that DNA circles are only possible if you connect your DNA test to a tree. Other people describe DNA circles as being mythical or a gimmick or a poor substitute for a chromosome browser. So there's certainly a mix of opinions and certainly some negative opinions out there about what DNA circles are and what they're capable of providing for us. And if I were to encapsulate or describe DNA circles as succinctly as possible, my answer would be that a DNA circle is a package of shared ancestor hints for a single ancestor. And we'll expand on that idea as we go forward. So in telling you how to get DNA circles or how you end up getting DNA circles, AncestryDNA says the following. You will get a DNA circle if you have a family tree that is public and linked to your DNA test results, and if you have at least 2 DNA matches who match you and each other at a second cousin level or further out, and if both of those matches have public family trees attached to their DNA tests, and if the 3 of you share a common ancestor. So those are the minimum requirements for getting a DNA circle. If you want to increase your probability of getting a DNA circle, you have to make sure your tree is public, as previously mentioned. You can also reach out to second cousins and more distant family members to remind them to build out their trees far enough for the shared ancestor to appear, and you have to remember to be an active subscriber. You can't get access to DNA circles with your DNA test results. You do have to be a subscriber. So my advice, to add to the advice provided by Ancestry, is to build out your tree on all lines, at least to your 4th great-grandparents if possible. You would want to go beyond 4th great-grandparents if your parents have tested, or if your grandparents have tested. And you do want to test multiple family members. It even helps to test siblings. That will increase the number of DNA circles that you get. And a third strategy is to share with your cousins, close and distant, and not just through communicating. You'll also want to share by choosing specific settings available at AncestryDNA, and we'll talk about that. So the best way to learn about circles is to dig in, and I know my own circles better than I know any other circles, so I'm going to give you some examples by looking at my own DNA circles. If you go to your main page at AncestryDNA, you'll find your DNA circles on the right side of the page. If you click to view all DNA circles, you'll be taken to a list of your DNA circles. In my case, Cinderella Sellers is among those DNA circles. And I click through and I get into Cinderella's DNA circle, and at the top of the page there's some introductory information and some biographical information. I want to emphasize the biographical information to make a little point. This says that when Cinderella Sellers was born in 1803 in Effingham County, Georgia, her father Samuel was 28 and her mother Mary was 23. It says that Cinderella had 7 sons and 13 daughters. This is absolutely incorrect. Cinderella had a total of 13 children, 4 sons, 9 daughters. This also says that she died in 1885 in Alma, Georgia. That is not quite correct either. She actually died in Appling County, near present-day Alma, Georgia, but Alma, Georgia did not even exist until 15 years after Cinderella died, and was not incorporated until about 20 years after Cinderella died. So I would certainly advise caution on this biographical information that is automatically generated by Ancestry's computer algorithms. And I emphasize this not only because it's important to take the biographical information with a grain of salt, but it foreshadows the need to take the genetic information with a grain of salt. So you can rely on your matches, but the conclusions that are drawn on the basis of the matches that you have in the form of the DNA circles and other information that Ancestry provides needs to be viewed with as much skepticism as we view these computer-generated biographical sketches. So let's be very careful about that and think about that as we go forward. Moving deeper into Cinderella's DNA circle, we see that she had several spouses. That is also incorrect. Among her spouses is Mourning Altman. Cinderella was definitely not married to Miss Altman. Miss Altman was one of her in-laws, but not one of her spouses. We have a list of 5 spouses in this DNA circle, Mourning Altman and 4 others. Cinderella was only married to James Lee. She was not married to Instance Hall or Frederick Lee or Miss Altman. So just remember that when we leave it to computer algorithms to assemble biographical information or to create DNA circles or to tell us about our genetic family history, we can get some really absurd results, and we need to pay a close attention to that. Also among the errors, there are 4 children that were reportedly born to Cinderella when she was about 80 years old. So some of this is really absurd. Here's some correct biographical information. She had 13 kids. She had a large family. She died in Appling County, Georgia, in contrast to the information reported in the DNA circle. So these user-generated inaccuracies are perpetuated by these DNA circles, and I think that these user-generated inaccuracies are fairly well understood, and we all know that we need to be looking for ourselves and studying the family history and looking at the paper trail ourselves. But it's not as well known that genetic inaccuracies can be just as big a problem, so we'll talk about that as we move forward. Watch out for errors with the DNA connections suggested by these DNA circles. So moving deeper into Cinderella's circle, we come to a graphical representation of the DNA connections, and as you can see, this is a nice large DNA circle, and my family is at the top. We're grouped together, close family members grouped together, and each of these golden spokes, some of the spokes are fairly straight and some are fairly curved, but each of these golden spokes within the DNA circles represents a DNA connection and a shared ancestor hint with an individual match or a small group of matches. And as we go clockwise through this circle, we start over here with very strong DNA connections with numerous matches within the circle, and as we move clockwise, we come to matches that have weak connections to the DNA circle and very few matches within the circle. So that's something to keep in mind as you look at these DNA circles. As you move even deeper into the DNA circle, you'll find a list of matches. So these, each of these matches represents a spoke, one of those golden spokes within the DNA circle. Each of these matches represents one shared ancestor hint. And I like to think of DNA circles as a collection of shared ancestor hints for a specific ancestor, as I mentioned, and you might also think of shared ancestor hints as the basic anatomical unit of a DNA circle. So with that in mind, let's look at 3 shared ancestor hints. So here's one shared ancestor hint for the Cinderella Sellers DNA circle. This is a shared ancestor hint for me and cousin D. So that's one shared ancestor hint and one golden spoke within the DNA circle for Cinderella Sellers. Shared ancestor hint number 2 is a match for cousin D and cousin JJ. So they have a shared ancestor hint for James Lee and Cinderella Sellers. They are both descendants of this couple and they both share DNA. And shared ancestor hint number 3 is a shared ancestor hint for me and cousin JJ. We are both descendants of James Lee and Cinderella Sellers, and we both share, and we do share DNA with each other. So these are 3 shared ancestor hints. These 3 hints alone would be enough to generate a shared ancestor hint for, would be enough to generate a DNA circle for Cinderella Sellers and James Lee. So again, a DNA circle can be thought of as a package of shared ancestor hints. At least 3 shared ancestor hints is required. In the case of Cinderella Sellers, there are quite a few more. And by the way, these 3 shared ancestor hints are enough to generate a DNA circle for James Lee as well. So again, a DNA circle is basically a package of shared ancestor hints for a single ancestor. An important question I think we need to ask about the DNA circles is whether DNA circles are actual evidence or proof of a DNA relationship with a specific ancestor. It's easy to come away with the impression that this is the case when you read the information that Ancestry puts into these circles. In each circle they note a DNA evidence shows that you are a descendant of Ancestor X because you were part of her circle, which includes 134 of her probable descendants. And this is the same line that they use for all of the DNA circles, even if the DNA connections are weak or if the number of people in the circle is very small. So this may be reasonably true for the big DNA circles, but it's less true for those smaller DNA circles. So even if you see this information, think about whether it's really likely to be true. So with the DNA circle for Cinderella Sellers, I would conclude that I am a likely descendant of Cinderella Sellers. Kind of knew that before I had a DNA circle. There are so many spokes, the connections are so robust. I think the DNA evidence does reinforce the assumption that she is truly our ancestor. But I would say we kind of fall short of proof or confirmation with the DNA circle. I think we have to consider it to be an interesting tool, but not necessarily proof. So the DNA circle for Cinderella Sellers probably doesn't provide us any new insights, but it might provide us with some opportunities for collaboration. It kind of brings some of the non-matches into view. Some of the people who belong to the circle don't match my family, but they may be strongly connected to the DNA circle. So that may be a useful feature of the circle. I would say if we are ever to use the DNA circles as advertised, as a tool for accelerated collaboration, we really need discussion groups within the circle so that we can work together as a group. Just to emphasize, not everybody who belongs to a big DNA circle is a good connection to the circle. So here's John. He's a member of the DNA circle because he matches one member of the circle. I would certainly hesitate to draw any conclusions on the basis of one single solitary DNA link to a DNA circle. In fact, if I were John, I'd be wondering why my connection to the DNA circle is so weak. There might be a problem with his tree, or he might not be genetically related to Cinderella seller. So certainly be cautious about drawing conclusions on the basis of the weaker DNA circle connections. So again, a recurring theme in this presentation: don't merely jump to conclusions on the basis of a nice DNA circle. Take a look at the DNA evidence as deeply and as carefully as you can. And we'll continue to emphasize that point. Here's another DNA circle. I'm not a member of this circle. This is the Mary Ann Hatcher DNA circle, and as you can see, not all DNA circles are as robust and impressive as the Cinderella seller circle. Some are very small and weak. This is a very small, very weak circle. And yet, we get the same claim from Ancestry at the top of the page. It says DNA evidence shows you're likely a descendant of Mary Ann Hatcher because you are a part of her DNA circle, which includes 3 of her probable descendants. I'm not sure how Ancestry could possibly know whether these people are probable descendants, but I would not jump to any conclusions on the basis of such a weak circle. So be careful with these very weak circles and confirm the DNA connections if at all possible. This is an example that I presented before. This is my Emily Elizabeth Deloach Circle, and I want to emphasize this example again because it's a very important example. So I'm in the Elizabeth Deloach DNA Circle in part because I share DNA with one of her descendants, cousin Danny. However, by examining the DNA evidence at 23andMe and GEDmatch, we were able to determine that the DNA that I share with Danny did not come to me from my mother. This DNA came to me from my father. So this shared ancestor hint really falls apart in light of that information. I could not have inherited this DNA from Emily Elizabeth Deloach if it came from my father. My father is not a descendant of Emily Elizabeth Deloach. Likewise, Danny did not inherit the DNA that he shares with me from his mother. He inherited it from his father. So we actually share another ancestor, and discovering the truth about this DNA led us to discover other very interesting discoveries, but it did cause this shared ancestor hint essentially to fall apart. So remember, a DNA circle is a collection of shared ancestor hints, and the quality of the circle is only as good as the shared ancestor hints within it, and we need to keep that in mind and examine the DNA evidence as closely as possible. I have blogged about this DNA circle, so if you're interested in the details, you can click on that link. The PDF file is available for free. I've put that out there for you. You can click this link to find the blog post where I talk about the details. You can also listen to me talk about this DNA circle in one of my videos. There's a short clip. You can follow that link to learn more. These mismatches are not entirely uncommon. They're fairly easy to find if you can get your hands on the match details from GEDmatch or 23andMe or Family Tree DNA. If you're able to get the match details, you can find the truth about these matches. This is another example of a maternal shared ancestor hint based on paternal DNA. Yet another example, this is the Shuman Circle, Ruel Shuman. I found a number of problems with this DNA circle. I won't get into the details now, but I think you'll find it interesting if you're interested in these kinds of issues. You can follow the link to my blog post entitled Anatomy of a DNA Circle to learn how this DNA circle really completely fell apart when we looked at the DNA details. Every member of this circle was on GEDmatch when I first analyzed the circle, so that made it interesting. One more example, fake circles. These circles are really completely fake. They came about as a result of a hypothesis that I briefly explored. So I still don't know the parents of my second great-grandfather, David Peoples. I was exploring a hypothesis on the basis of some of my DNA matches, and I added some hypothetical parents and grandparents, and as a result of briefly having these people in my family tree, I got 2 DNA circles, despite the fact that there is really no evidence at all that these people are my direct ancestors. So I took these people out of my tree after exploring that hypothesis for a brief period, and despite the fact that they are no longer in my tree and they have not been in my tree for at least a few months, I still have DNA circles for this couple. So remember that not only can these DNA circles be based on weak evidence, they can really come about as a result of pure speculation and information that really isn't true. So this kind of takes me back to what we discussed earlier when the DNA circles were first rolled out. Ancestry bragged that the good news is that we've trained the computer to do the hard stuff like DNA matching, tree comparisons, and triangulation. Well, computers really aren't good at any of this, to be honest, and we still have to do the hard stuff. The computers are reasonably good at tree comparisons, but even there, humans are much better at making tree comparisons. So although DNA circles were made with the best of intentions, and even though they're interesting and in some cases useful, we still have to be prepared to do the hard stuff and take a look at what these DNA circles really mean. So again, confirm the DNA connections. Don't stop after you have verified the family tree connections. And all of the examples that I've provided you so far, the paper trail connections are impeccable. The evidence is strong. There's really no question as to whether the paper trail evidence is sufficient, but the DNA connections may not be what they appear to be at first glance, and I would certainly advise you to treat the DNA evidence like any other evidence. Give it the serious consideration that it deserves. It's very good evidence, but it deserves to be examined very closely. Don't skip over it and make assumptions. So getting back to getting DNA circles, it's fun to have DNA circles, and in some cases they are useful. So I want to talk about what you can do to get DNA circles, and I want to give examples of how these strategies work, particularly these 2 points. So I want to emphasize the point that to get more DNA circles and to benefit from DNA testing more generally, you want to test multiple family members. It's great to test parents and grandparents if you can. Even if you can't test parents and grandparents, you can get a lot of mileage out of test results for your siblings. So test other family members. Also, the second point here that I want to emphasize again, share with your cousins, not merely by contacting them and sending them pictures and files, but share by choosing specific settings at AncestryDNA that will give them access to your matches in your circles. We'll talk about how to do that. So here's an example of why you want to test other family members. This is a DNA circle for my daughter, Milton Bordeaux. He is her 5th great-grandfather. You don't normally get DNA circles for 5th great-grandparents unless you have tested a family member, a close family member, who is closer to that ancestor. So the range is great-grandparents, 2nd great-grandparents, 3rd great-grandparents, and 4th great-grandparents. Unless you have tested a parent, a grandparent, or some other close family member who is closer to that ancestor, you will not get 5th or 6th great-grandparents. But because I have tested my wife, my daughter's mother, my daughter does have a DNA circle for her 5th great-grandfather, Milton Bordeaux. And to emphasize this point, I'll note that I have 55 DNA circles, my wife has 12 DNA circles, and my daughter has all 67 of those DNA circles. She inherited all of our circles, even the ones who are at the 5th great-grandparent level. So she would not have gotten those 5th great-grandparent circles if one or both of her parents had not tested. So 67 circles, that's all of both parents' circles, and that gives more access. Here's another example. Here's a Studstill Circle. I'm a descendant of Hustis Studstill, and that's a big tongue twister for me. He is my 6th great-grandfather. How do I have this DNA circle? I didn't get it by testing parents or grandparents. I'm not supposed to have 6th great-grandparent DNA circles, but because I'm sharing with a distant cousin who has this DNA circle, I have access to the Hustis Studstill DNA circle. So I want to talk to you about how you share with your close and distant cousins, because this is a very powerful but underappreciated way of getting more DNA circles and getting access to circles that would otherwise be impossible for you. When you are on your main AncestryDNA page, you click on the settings button. Clicking on that will take you to a page where you can scroll down to where you see the words DNA ethnicity and matches access. If you click on this area that says add a person, then you can add your distant cousins, you can add your close cousins, you can add anybody you choose, and if that person reciprocates, you get access to their matches and their DNA circles. So this is a very easy and powerful way to get access to more matches and more DNA circles. I highly recommend it. I've done it with a good number of people. I do it with even more, as many people who are willing to do it. Just a brief mention of new ancestor discoveries. These are like DNA circles, but they're not exactly DNA circles. My family has one new ancestor discovery. A lot of these new ancestor discoveries are confusing and irrelevant, but occasionally you'll get lucky and you'll get a good one. We've lost all of our bad ones. We still have one DNA one NAD. One new ancestor discovery. This one is for Isham Samuel Peacock. We could, in fact, be a descendant of Isham Samuel Peacock, but we don't know how we're related to this person. We could be a descendant. There could be some other relationship. We really don't know for sure, but it does open up an interesting avenue for research. And we have this new ancestor discovery for Isham Samuel Peacock because we match a good number of people who have an Isham Samuel Peacock DNA circle. So for us, it's not a DNA circle, it's an NAD, a new ancestor discovery. For us, it's an NAD because this person is not in our family tree, and we're shown as being outside of the circle on the periphery, but there are a large number of connections. And in fact, this new ancestor discovery only belongs to my sister. Nobody else in the family has this new ancestor discovery. We all do match a good number of people in this circle. So there's something interesting there. I'm not sure exactly what to do with it yet, but there is some potential. So keep an eye out for those new ancestor discoveries, but remember, you might never figure out how you're legitimately related to the person featured by the new ancestor discovery. I want to address the issue of what I call missing DNA circles. If you look at your family tree, the range of possibility for DNA circles runs from your great-grandparents' generation through the second greats, third greats, and fourth greats. So that's the range. You have the range of great-grandparents to fourth great-grandparents, unless you've tested members of other generations of your close family. So if you've tested your parents or grandparents, you have a bigger range, but if you've only tested yourself and your own generation, you have the range that goes from your great-grandparents to your fourth great-grandparents, and that gives you a total of 120 possible DNA circles, if I know anything about arithmetic. So you can take a look at that number and compare it to your actual number. For me, the actual number is 55-ish, 53, depending on which ones you take seriously. So obviously I don't have nearly as many, or I don't have even half as many as I could have. And I think it's helpful to look at your family tree and maybe chart it out and see where the missing ancestors are. So I've done that, and I'll run through that very quickly so I can hit a specific point here. This is, I'm going to go by each grandparent. To do everybody all at once would not be practical on a slide. So looking at my paternal grandfather, you can see pretty good coverage, but there are some important ancestors who are missing. In the case of David Peoples and B.D. Youngblood, I do have some strong matches who are descendants of David Peoples and B.D. Youngblood. They are second cousins and third cousins, and I can't explain the lack of a family, the lack of a DNA circle for these two ancestors, except that there are some differences in the basic biographical information that we have for these two ancestors in our respective family trees. So because of some differences in birth and death years, it appears that the algorithms at Ancestry have decided that these people are not the same people, but they are. So my David Peoples is the same David Peoples that my second and third cousins have in their tree, but the computer algorithms at Ancestry don't recognize that. So the lesson there is that if you go through the DNA circles that you have and you find where the missing circles are, you might want to get in contact with your matches to get on the same page with respect to the biographical information, and that might be helpful. Moving on to my paternal grandmother, we see that her mother's side of the tree is much better represented than her father's side of the tree. I don't really have a good explanation for that, except probably there's an issue with documentation, as we'll talk about coming up here really soon. She's new, so she really hasn't had time to come into the picture. So documentation is certainly a big issue. Moving on to my maternal grandfather, we see pretty good coverage over here, pretty good coverage here, a big hole here, not a lot of red boxes. I don't think that this is a documentation issue, and looking at this dearth of circles and considering other evidence together with that, I have come to strongly suspect that there's an issue of misattributed parentage somewhere in here. So that's not a conclusion that you necessarily have to jump to every time you find a gap, but in this case I think that's probably, or quite possibly, what's going on. So another thing to consider when you see a big dearth of DNA circles. And then finally, my maternal grandmother's family tree, a little sparse on this side, and I think that's just an issue of documentation. So moving on, I did promise a DNA circle success story, and that's where we are in the presentation now. I want to talk to you about my DNA circle success story. I have a new DNA circle. This DNA circle is for William Butler. We can go back up into my paternal grandmother's tree. Here's William Butler. We have a new DNA circle for William Butler. I'm not exactly sure how old this circle is because only one member of my family has this DNA circle listed with their DNA circles where you would normally find it. And so it could have been there for a good while before I noticed it, and I might not have noticed it for a good while longer, but I was contacted by a member of this DNA circle, a very thorough genealogist, a distant cousin named Keith Etheridge, who's given me permission to mention him in this discussion. And because he contacted my sister's account, and because I managed that account, this DNA circle did eventually come to my attention. So we now know that we have a William Butler DNA circle. And here again is William Butler, our fourth great-grandfather. His son was David P. Butler, our third great-grandfather. He was married to Minnie O. Minnie O, our third great-grandmother. Until this DNA circle arrived on the scene, we really knew almost nothing about Minnie O. We didn't know if O was O for a middle name or for a maiden name. We didn't know how long she lived. We had essentially no information about Minnie O. But because Keith contacted me and provided me with some really exciting information, we cracked this case and crushed a brick wall. So just to give you some context, I was really so keen to find out who Minnie O was. I hired a professional genealogist to help me with this case, but unfortunately she wasn't able to move things forward much further. She mentioned that her investigation led to hundreds of possibilities, and so we really didn't get very far there. The lesson is if I ever ask you for help, you should probably just run. It's going to be a tough one. But because of this new DNA circle, we really were able to break down this brick wall. So Keith contacted me and he said we are both, or contacted my sister and I managed the account. He said we are both descended from William Butler and Nancy Crawford. Their sons are our respective ancestors. Their son Doc A.H. Butler is my ancestor and their son David P. Butler is your ancestor. David died in 1875. According to my research, David married Mary Octavia Etheridge, Minnie O. I did not know that they had any children. And these two ancestors died very young, so they left very little in the way of any kind of paper trail. David died before he reached 23 years of age. Keith went on further to say, in SL's family tree, she is descended from David and Minnie O. Butler. Attached is a census from 1880. It lists Minnie O. Butler and 2 children. I had never heard Mary Octavia Etheridge Butler referred to as Minnie O, but this has to be her. On the census listed just above her are my ancestors Doc A.H. Butler and Elizabeth J. Butler, David's brother and sister-in-law. And just below Minnie O is her father, David Etheridge, his second wife Susan, and Minnie/Mary's half-siblings. And this is the census document that Keith so kindly pointed out. So, to make a long story short, anyway, we got to the bottom of it, and we found out that Mary Octavia Etheridge was Minnie O. Butler, and with some traditional paper trail research, we've completely demolished this brick wall, and there's still a lot I'd like to learn. I'd like to know why her husband David died when he was 22 years old. I'd like to know why Mary died so young. I don't know anything about any of that, but we're well on our way to making some good progress as a result of the good work of Keith Etheridge and his willingness to reach out and share some great information. So that's my DNA success story. To To summarize, I'd hesitate to say that DNA circles offer any kind of proof or even confirmation. It's hard to use them for rigorous research or brick wall research, but you can make some lucky discoveries. You can meet some new cousins potentially. They're fun to play around with. There are ways to increase your probability of getting DNA circles and to get more DNA circles. So have fun with DNA circles, test family members, encourage people to build trees, and learn what you can. And maybe if you get lucky, after a few years, you'll be contacted by a really helpful cousin. I would say we've got some room for improvement with DNA circles. First of all, we need the ability to communicate within circles so that we can all work together rather than messaging each other individually. This is a quote that came from a Facebook group. These are not my words, but I agree with these words 100%. We need expanded access to DNA circles. We can get that for ourselves to some extent by sharing with cousins, but I think the arbitrary fourth great-grandparent line is not a particularly helpful line, and it should be reconsidered. And we desperately need a chromosome browser, or at least the chromosome browser information, the information that chromosome browsers provide. If we could combine chromosome browser information with DNA circles, we'd have an immensely powerful resource. So I think we should still continue to nudge Ancestry in that direction. I don't know what kind of tools they have coming up. I know that they're announcing some new features at Roots Tech. Nothing is a substitute for a chromosome browser. Nothing is a substitute for matching segment information, individual chromosome information. So even if we can't persuade Ancestry on this point, we can persuade our cousins to take advantage of GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA and MyHeritage and 23andMe, where this kind of powerful information is available. So that brings us to the end of the presentation of the prepared comments. Again, as always, if you enjoy this video, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Hitting the like button helps bring this material to other people's attention. And before I move on to Q&A, I will announce the winner of the AncestryDNA test kit, LaJuan Gray. I hope I said that correctly. LaJuan Gray is the winner of the AncestryDNA test kit, chosen at random from my YouTube channel subscribers. So congratulations to LaJuan Gray. Please contact me via Facebook or email jxleafam@gmail.com so that I can know where to send you your new AncestryDNA test kit. And now we come to Q&A. I know I kind of blew through it again without interacting as we went along, but I do want to answer the questions that came up. So I'll see what we have. Maybe I'll just start from the end and go backwards. Norma says, thanks for sharing your knowledge. You're welcome. Thanks for joining us. Patty says, thank you. You're welcome. Thanks for joining us. Peter says, thanks. Let's see. Norma asks, what do you do when you don't have a birth date or death for your BF? I assume that's the birth father. That's certainly a challenge, and it doesn't really play into what we look at with DNA circles. DNA circles are for more distant ancestry. Let's see. Rhonda asks, what's going on if you have lots of DNA matches but only ancestor hints / circles from one parent? So that's probably just an issue of documentation. So if you see strong genetic ties, but you're not seeing the hints or circles that you'd like to see with those strong genetic ties, it's probably just an issue of documentation, and you probably need to reach out to your cousins and ask them to improve their family tree information, build out their family trees, add additional information, so that the computer algorithms will recognize the similarities and draw the proper conclusions. So we can't absolutely take over what our distant cousins are doing, but we can encourage them to build things out and make things correct. Peter said, all of mine are from my paternal grandfather. So certainly DNA circles are not always distributed evenly, even when there's no reason to suspect. Even when there's no reason to suspect that there's any kind of disconnect in the biological lines. Debbie said, my great-grandfather Wood had 20 kids. I have 219 in that circle. Leslie says, discussion groups would be great. You know, we really desperately need a way to communicate with each other as a group within a DNA circle. That would be very, very useful, and we really ought to nudge Ancestry in that direction. I've suggested it to Ancestry, and I know many other people have as well. I'm not sure what Ancestry thinks about that idea. I don't know if they've ever addressed it. And I don't know if they've taken it seriously, but they certainly should. Peter asked, can we expect a big announcement on Thursday from the Roots Tech announcement? I think we're going to get some glossy new features, some shiny new toys from AncestryDNA, and some of those toys might be fairly useful, but I don't have any inside information on that. So we'll have to wait and see. If the past is any guide, they'll be very pretty. How useful they'll be is another question. Judy asks, why does it say in DNA circles that there's only some or weak membership confidence when you know you are closely connected? So what AncestryDNA reports in terms of the strength of the connection or the strength of the circle depends entirely on the amount of DNA that they think that the people share with each other. So they make their estimates, and you may have additional information from closer examination. Unfortunately, Ancestry's numbers for shared centimorgans are a bit unorthodox, so you may see some discrepancies. You may see strength where they see weakness. You may know about connections from testing at other companies. There's a lot that you know that Ancestry can't know, and there's a lot that they do with their data that skews things downward in terms of the amount of DNA shared. So there's not much we can do about that except to encourage Ancestry to improve their tools and get rid of their timber algorithm. Let's see, someone says, my daughter has a possible second cousin. Could she possibly be related to a child of mine taken at birth? Or would it be from her unknown father's side? I'd have to take a look at the details on that one. The questions about birth parents. are a little bit harder to address and aren't answered with DNA circle analysis. Oh, I accidentally turned on quiet mode. Okay, so we'll wrap things up with that. If you have any other questions, let me know. You can put in your questions in the comment section now or later. This will also be posted on YouTube where you can ask your questions. Thanks again for joining me. We'll do this again soon. I think our next presentation will come in a couple of weeks, and I'll probably talk about a new concept that I think is really exciting. Norma says, I just logged into my Ancestry account to look at my DNA circle and it is wiped clean. DNA circles do disappear, and that's especially the small ones. The small DNA circles can disappear when someone changes something in their family tree, unfortunately. And there may be other reasons for DNA circles to disappear. All right, Melissa says thanks, Darlene says thanks, Leslie says thanks, Norma says thanks. Gladys says sister-in-law has 1 week circle that there are only 2 or 3 matches. Is that a tree problem? Not necessarily. Probably not a tree problem. It's not a tree problem for the people in the circle. It may be a problem for people who haven't built their trees and haven't yet been drawn into the circle. Okay, thanks again. We'll do this again soon.